All right, so last class we talked about integrating your building into the site and being able to drop it in. Remember, your building should be a block reference such that you can have your block reference building open in a different file. You make changes to the geometry of the building itself in this file that then updates into the master site file, which is your other Rhino file. By the way, in Rhino, if you have something open and you go to File, Open, it will close what you have open and open the new document. If you want two Rhinos open at the same time, open Rhino twice and then open from within each, and you can have both of them open at the same time. So I have them both open at the same time. I'm going to go back to my master site piece, where last class we did insert in the ocean. So that exists in the same place here. And then I have my building cut out. I made a modification to this little piece of terrain there. And I actually made a modification that was necessary right here. But once I've joined it back together, it's essentially the same thing as a big surface. So today we're going to talk about kind of establishing a nice final rendering viewport for yourself, and then we'll talk about kind of tweaking and making that one viewport look a little bit better and some of the strategies that you might employ to do that. So the first thing when you're looking at a final rendering, and by the way, this is essentially kind of the first final rendering you're going to do of your project. I don't anticipate that this is actually going to be the final rendering, but the goal and the reason that you're doing it today is because of how much stuff is left to do going forward. That's kind of where you should be. And so the idea is that the geometry is done, the materials have been applied, the texture maps have been done correctly, and now it's kind of a refinement phase where we're going to look at it. And so if I start to look at my building, there are views that are better than others. And the historical, I'm going to take the bird's eye perspective looking down on my building strategy is really hard to do and to make it look good in a presentation form. The only version that I've ever seen that looks good was one that was done several years ago where they made it look like it was coming out of an airplane window. And so they showed like the inside of the airplane kind of faded out in a drawing, and then as you look through that, you saw the airplane view of your building. And it was kind of cool. But most of the time, what we're looking for is some kind of a ground level perspective of our building. And for that, we need to kind of position where does the camera belong in relation to our building. And so it's a little awkward if you're hanging on the side of a cliff, because your natural tendency is, okay, well that would look pretty good, but I'm floating in space somewhere in this particular vantage point. I can, if I show 4 views at once, I can choose to show my camera. If I go to set camera and then show camera in this view, it will appear in one of my other views. So we can see here that the camera is, where I'm standing from, that point right there is floating in space. So unless you can fly, which I doubt you can, this is kind of a challenging vantage point to have. So as I move myself around, if I drop myself to be looking as if I was standing on the beach looking up at this, that would be certainly a view that you could see of this house. I don't know that this is the most attractive view in the world. So as I keep moving myself around, I want to try to think about, okay, well, what view do I want? Do I want to be looking up at it there? Not really. If I was standing on the hill, though, somewhere over in here, that might not be bad. So you need to, based on your building, decide what is the right view, what looks good, what's going to present the dramatic rendering that you want to have. And then you need to start to adjust the view for that particular purpose. So in this case, this is approximately where I'm shooting for my rendering. And I can refine this. I could zoom in a little bit. I could adjust, exactly where I'm looking for. The other thing that is a factor is, do I want to make sure that I'm seeing all of the building as part of my rendering? Do I want to be zoomed in and seeing a much tighter vantage point, something like that, where maybe part of my building is cut off? What's the right match for my particular building? And consequently, what pieces of ground really matter? What am I going to see? And so in this class, for 136, we don't overemphasize the use of Photoshop to fake stuff, right? The natural reaction is, let me do, especially if you took 135, let me do a rendering that's about like this, and I'll go find a hill that looks like this that's grassy, and I'll just drop that in, use a little grass brush, touch it up, and it'll look beautiful, and I don't have to worry about it. Well, because 136 is, quote, independent of 135, and you can take them in any order, I can't assume that you'll just drop a nice little photoshopped hill in and call it a day. So we have to figure out how to make that stuff up in V-Ray. And so what happens when we get into the world of V-Ray rendering is you can get 80% of the way to a really good rendering pretty easily. The last 20% of that rendering takes all the work. If you Photoshop something, on the other hand, you can get a decent looking thing with 80% of the work, and then it takes that extra 20% to make it look really good, to do the reflections and the hard stuff in Photoshop, right? So if we combine the two in an ideal world, you can do much less work. You let V-Ray do the reflections and all the hard stuff that would be hard in Photoshop, and you do the easy stuff in Photoshop that's hard for V-Ray. And the two mesh together, and we save time. But that's not how we get to do it, at least in the beginning stages here. Those of you that did take 135 and feel comfortable, substitute everything I'm about to say with Photoshop, clone stamp, grass brush. Okay? So, one of the important things, however, when you're thinking about V-Ray and actually rendering a particular scene is to control what's seen in this, what is actually in the scene, and not have extra superfluous geometry that's sitting outside of it. So I'm going to start bringing in some grass to actually render, but I don't want a bunch of extra grass that's not in the actual view that I'm looking at. So establishing your view first is really, really critical. So I'm going to establish a view that's about like this. I may need to do a little bit of panning so that maybe this is a little bit higher. It's about like that. So I'm getting the whole building in. I'm deliberately clipping off part of this. I'm using the compositional rule of thirds to have the primary axis of my building at about a third of the way over. I'm making the open space looking out toward the ocean. That's the view. That's what I want to accentuate anyway. So you guys kind of see how I'm setting this up, right? I'm also limiting the grass area that I have to deal with to a very small region right here because I'm going to render the grass as opposed to just photoshopping it in. If I was going to Photoshop it in, I could have a much larger piece of grass because I can get a hill picture and drop it in. So in this context, I'm limiting the grass, but I'm also giving myself a pretty good vantage point of this particular building. So at this point, I want to save my view as a named view so that once I get this really nicely established, this is really what I want it to be. The one other thing that's worth looking at as you start to set up this view is when nothing is selected, what is your camera's lens length? And so I cheated a bit because mine's already set at 28, which is pretty good for an exterior photograph. When we move to the interior renderings in a couple days, we'll start using maybe an 18 millimeter, much wider, so we can get more context of our scene. But an exterior at 28 is pretty good. Your default is going to be 50 millimeters, which isn't as wide. It's a little narrow. I'll switch it back to that after I save my view. But now that I have this view established, I want to go ahead and save it. So I'll click on the little triangle. Yours probably says perspective. I'll click on the little triangle. I'll go down to Set View, Named Views, and I'm then going to save this as, let's call this Exterior Render, and actually don't put any spaces in this. 0, 1. And I'll go ahead and say Save. And now I can return to this view. So if I switch the lens length to 50, which is what the default was, it's harder to get it established right. See how I get a lot more over here of the hill? By going a little wider, I can get my building, but not as much of the hill. And so if I want to go back to that view that I saved, it's just a matter of going back to Set View. Now it's listed here, Exterior Render 1. Boom, I'm back in that view. And before you do any renders, especially toward the final, make sure you save your view because you're going to discover in the rendering process that things go wrong and they didn't work right. And if you have the view that you like, you can always go back to that view over and over again and re-render it. So I now have this established the way I want it. The view is set up the way I want it. And now I want to deal with this little grassy patch over here so that I can kind of fake what grass looks like. And so one of the options is to find some kind of a grass-like material and stick it on there. But the truth is none of those options really look that great. You can go to Flying Architecture, and I think they have a material called grass that is very kind of spiky, and you can drop it in there, but it doesn't really look that good. You can apply kind of a greenish, brownish material to it and kind of fake it, but it doesn't really look good. So what we need is an actual piece of grass. And I adapted a tutorial that was on Flying Architecture where they were doing it for a flat, like a landscape, like you had a lawn. And I think it's under tutorials here. I don't know, it's probably back. I don't know. It's back in the archive a ways. But essentially what they did was they took a flat kind of series of strips and they made a special material for it, and that material is made up of two parts. One is a picture of some grass. So there's a picture of some grass, and it has a blue sky. And then they created a transparency map. Remember, you guys did this. That is essentially, looks like grass, little spikes in the grass. They then applied this material to some curving planes that were, when they did it, it was short, i.e. a lawn height, a couple inches. And they intersected those at kind of odd angles. And when you render it looking at it in perspective, the overlapping pieces make it look like grass. So what I did is I adapted the same thing, but I created, instead of a long kind of lawn type thing, because most of what we're doing is going to be on a hillside, I made these little kind of concave shapes that have the same material applied on them, but that intersect each other. Okay, so it's a nest of these planes that have kind of grass. If you were to do a rendering that looked straight down on them, they would not look particularly attractive. But if you do a rendering that looks in perspective at them, you get kind of a nice grass look. So something like this is the render that I just did of this set of objects. So there they are, and there's the grass. So as long as you're looking at it in perspective, it looks reasonably like grass, wouldn't you say? So we're going to use these as blocks. They're available on the course website. If you go, and I have to fix the link, I apologize. If you go under tutorials and then V-Ray, nope, sorry, it's under resources, Rhino Blocks Landscape. There's something called bunch grass. That's the one you want. Okay? And if you go to bunch grass, there it is. There's a little rendering of it. You're going to download the 3DM file, which is the Rhino file. You're going to download the material package that is the material for it. So you need to make sure you have both. And once you have both, this was just a little setup so that you guys could see it, you're going to open up your final site, your master site file, and you're going to drop in the bunch grass on this little piece of ground. And so there's a variety of ways of doing it. So first off, let's go to layers, and under the site environment layer, I'm going to create a sublayer for bunch grass. I recommend creating a sublayer for the bunch grass, and then we'll make it the active layer, before you bring it in, because you're going to want to be able to turn the grass off. Sometimes you want to do a rendering that tests what the materials look like on your building. Whenever you enable the grass, it's going to take significantly longer to render. So being able to turn it off temporarily is a good idea. So with the bunch grass layer here, I'm going to go up to my Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'm going to go find that bunch grass, which is in my Resources folder on my flash drive. Under Rhino Blocks, Landscape, there's bunch grass. And I'll go ahead and say OK. There it is. I'll say OK. Same thing here. We want to link the file as a reference. It's called bunch grass. We'll say OK. And in a little bit, we'll be able to stick it into our file. So I'm just going to snap it to the edge of this for just a second. There it is, kind of floating there. Notice that I get a layer called bunch grass. That should then have the bunch grass material applied to it, which it does. And I should also go and double check in my materials. I should look for bunch grass and make sure that it loaded correctly. If I click preview, it shouldn't be gray. It should look like grass, which it does, so we're OK. In your case, if you first load it, it may not work, so you'll have to replace the material. If you right-click on bunch grass and say import material, go find the bunch grass material and drop it in there as well. So you just want to make sure that the material is there. So now we need to kind of look at this grass, and remember this little surface was the surface I was dealing with. And I need to make sure that this little piece of grass covers up that surface. And so if I were to look at it, say in the top view, there it is. We'll move it over a little bit. And at this point, turning off your snap, your object snap, is probably not a bad idea. Turning off your ortho is probably not a bad idea either. So I now have it overlapping my wall just a little bit. If that helps to create the density that you need. And the next piece here is to copy and paste it a number of times and start to adjust this piece of grass across this surface. And you can do this manually. I could go to copy, and I want to make sure that these overlap a little bit. Maybe about like that. Now, I can go back to my exterior render 1. And we can see, oh, OK, well, these ones are turning out OK. And they're OK along here, but the slope is going to start to go up. So as I continue to do this, go back to the top view here. If I take these, looks like that one's not shown, so we're not going to worry about that one. And I copy this, and I move it over so that they intersect a little bit. And it might be nice to make them a little staggered here. Get rid of this one. These are going to have to come up a little bit. So I'll have to take these and maybe move vertical. Right, maybe I'd move them in this side view. Oops. Sorry. Move them up just a little bit. Like that. And then ultimately, I'm going to have to do it for all of them and start to differentiate as they go up. It's a little bit annoying to do this manually and to go through. So the other option is that we can array these across the surface. And this one gets a little bit tricky to do it because it doesn't always work out. And I hesitate to do it live because the likelihood of my failing at doing it is probably 60%. So you doing it is probably even higher. It's probably 80% failure rate. But it's worth a try because it saves a little bit of time. So I'm going to give it a shot, and we'll see what happens. So in the perspective view here, I'm going to get rid of these block instances. I'm going to turn off. I'm in ghosted mode. I'm going to go back to shaded mode so that it's easier to select these. And we're going to leave that one where it is. And I'll go ahead and press delete. OK. So now we're going to, this is an array. So I'll start typing array. But we're going to look at the list here. And we're going to array surface, array srf. And so we're going to select objects to array. There is my block instance. We'll go ahead and hit enter when I'm done. Base point of objects to array, we'll pick the corner of the surface right there. So let me turn back on the object snap right there. Reference normal for objects to array. Now, I think this has to go straight down instead of straight up. This is one of those tricky things. I told you, 60% failure rate for me. So let me make sure that it goes straight down. There. Target surface to array. That's going to be my target surface. Number of elements in the U direction. Let's do maybe 5. We'll see how it works. Number in the V, we'll do 5. It did OK. So you can see that it's now putting those on the surface and adjusting their heights for me. So we're making some progress. It's not quite right. They're all a little bit tall. They need to be squatted down a little bit. And the density, I think I need more than 5. I need maybe 6 or 7. So let me undo that, and we're going to try it one more time. So array srf. Select objects to array. Let's block instance. Enter when done. Base point. You know, I might go in a little bit here. Let's try that. Reference normal. We're going to go straight down. Why it's straight down, I don't know. Target surface. There's my surface. Number and direction, let's go maybe 7. And we'll do 7. And that was much denser than I was originally intending. But OK, we're starting to make some pretty good progress. So I need to get rid of these ones that are outside of my wall. So let's get rid of these. All right, and let's get rid of these. All right, and then let's go back and double check in set view, my exterior 1 view, of what I'm actually seeing here. And do I like what I'm seeing? Do I not like what I'm seeing? This one seems a little high. Let me move it vertically down a bit so it's not quite so high. And for whatever reason, that one just seems out of place. So let me go back to my set view, my exterior render 1. OK, so maybe this is kind of working for me. I've got those grass pieces put in there. And now it's time to do a test to see if it actually looks OK. The other thing that can be necessary is if we look at this in the top view, they're all exactly the same. We may need to do some rotations randomly so that it changes the alignments. We'll see how it looks when we do the exterior render. So let me go back to my set view, exterior render 1. There it is. So now I have grass. But it also might be nice to have some rocks in the grass, because grass sometimes has rocks in it. So lo and behold, I do have some rocks available for you as well. If you go to resources, this is the same thing. We go to Rhino blocks, we go to landscape, and there's some rocks. You can make your own rocks, but here's some rocks that you can use as well. So if we download those, I have a couple different groupings here. They'll come down as a 3DM file. Always useful to double check the 3DM file and open it before you do it to make sure that you like what you're seeing. All right, so there's the rocks. They don't look too bad. And so we can go ahead, let's double check the layers here. See, they're on the default layer. Let's change the layer to be rocks. And I don't know that the material, basic granite, it must be applied to the objects themselves. But let's apply it to the layer just in case on the rocks layer there. OK, so now that's good. Let me do a save as and drop this into my flash drive in my resources folder. Rhino blocks, landscape, and granite boulder group 1. We'll go ahead and say save. Perfect. Now I'll go back to my master site, and we'll go ahead and go to edit, blocks, insert block instance. And I'm going to put this on the same layer as the bunch grass. It doesn't really matter for right now. Let me go find the rocks. Granite boulder group 1. We'll say OK. And we're going to try to drop them somewhere here as well. So they're looking a little small. So let's scale them, I don't know, maybe by 2.5. There we go. A little bigger. And then let's take those and let's move them kind of over into the grass somewhere. doing a terrible job of snapping here. There. Let's move them vertically. Drop them down a little bit. If part of it's buried, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so there's some rocks with some grass poking out around them. I could probably delete a few pieces of grass that are intersecting them. Like that, something along those lines. Okay, and so now I have that. So if I go back to my exterior render and I go to set viewport, set view exterior render 1, there it is. I've got my little granite boulder. I've got my grass. Now it's time to do a test. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll go to my V-Ray options, and I want to make sure under output that I'm set to a really small size. And with that really small size set, sometimes you want to also get the view aspect so it matches exactly what you're seeing on the screen, and then relock it. And now I have a really small little setup here. We'll go ahead and do a test render. And as is the nature when we start this phase of the class, these renders can take time. So I'm not going to make you sit and listen to me. I'll pause the recording, and then we'll revisit it. OK, it looks really dark, which probably means the last time I did this rendering, it was a night rendering. So I need to make a few updates to the background. So let me go ahead and go back to my V-Ray options, and I'm going to load up one of the default setups. So if I go to resources and I go to quick rendering setups, oops. There we go. I'm going to use this basic day scene 1 background. Okay? So I've already downloaded this. I already have this all set. The only thing that I need to do is I need to put a sun in that's set to this particular time and day. So I'll do that as well. So first thing I'll do is I'll load the visopt file that matches up. So let me go into my resources. Let me go to V-Ray HDRI. This is a day HDRI, and it's this one. And we'll load the settings. Good. Settings are loaded. I do need to make sure that my maps are set up correctly. So in environment, I'm going to click on my GI skylight map and make sure that it's pointed to my resources, V-Ray HDRI. And this is a day HDRI, and it's this one. And I'll say OK. And I'll make sure my background is also set. That one. If I were to preview it, we'd see the preview of it there. Perfect. And I'll say OK. So now those two are set. That's good. I feel good. I'll come back to the output in just a second, but I did have to put the sun into the scene. So it looks like I have a sun already in the scene. There it is. Let's make sure that the time matches up. So if I click on the sun, if I go to Properties, I go to Light, I can then click on Modify Sun. Brings me back to the sun options. And this was in San Francisco. And it was set for 5/2 of 5, maybe not. 2 of 2016. It was at 2:30 p.m. with daylight savings time set to on. There we go. I'll go ahead and say OK. And my sun adjusted slightly. So those were set up for you in advance so you know and can easily adapt those. So now I'll go back to my V-Ray options. I'm going to go to Output. And once again, I'll unlock the view, get the view aspect, lock it again. So what I see is exactly what's going to render. And then we'll set the height to be really small at like 100. And we'll give this a quick render and see. So let me go ahead and render it again. So part of the reason we always do this small is we can get a quick check on what's working and what's not working. So the ocean's working. the sky's working, my building's working, something went wrong with my grass. I'm not seeing the grass texture. So the grass texture didn't load correctly. So I need to go back and double check that. The granite texture didn't load correctly either. So I need to make sure both of those are working. So let me close that for right now. I'm going to go to my materials. I'm going to go down here to my bunch grass, wherever that is. It looks like I have two different bunch grasses. Let me go ahead and reload both of them. Import material. And resources, V-Ray, V-Ray materials, landscape, grass, bunch grass. There we go. And let me make sure the other bunch grass is also set. Wait for V-Ray to crash for a little bit. All right, and let's make sure the other bunch grass, I don't know which one I was using. Let's go import material. Let's make sure both of those. And then I think the other one was called basic granite. I'm betting, yep, that one didn't load. So let me go ahead and import material on that one. And it's probably under stone. Nope, it's not that one. So I'm going to have to find the basic granite. I think it's probably available. Basic granite, there it is. So I have to extract this basic granite to my flash drive in my resources folder. And it should be in stone. And we'll go ahead and put it there. Oh, it should have been in its own folder. Let me quickly create a new folder for basic granite. And we'll stick those guys into the basic granite folder. All right, and let's go ahead and reload that. There we are. Import material. Stone, basic granite. There it is. Looks like granite. Excellent. So we have both of those resolved. Now I can go back and do that render again. And we can see if we get some results. Probably a good sign that this is taking a while. Yep, and we're getting a bunch of green there. So it's probably going the right direction. I would let this one finish in this very blurry preview mode before I wasted the resources to do a higher quality render. So remember, start small before you do it. Once you get to the point of being ready to really pump up the rendering a bit, that's the time to enable the network render. So if I go to V-Ray options, at that point, before you do it, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and save your settings just to make sure that they're accurate, and you can reload them if you want. So I would go ahead and save my VisOpt right now, and I might do, let's put it in today's folder just as a backup here. Let's see here. This would be in today. It's 221, but I only have a 220 folder, and I would save this as master site day spring 2017, and I'll click save. That way I can reload it. If something crashed, it's working, we'll make sure I read it. Now, if I look at it in this context, notice the grass is looking pretty good. I've got a few holes that are going to show up along this edge, so I need a few more little pieces of grass there. It looks like I have one little hole there, but on the most part, it looks decent, and that's what I'm after. So now would be the time to kind of bump it up a little bit. So under output, we can go ahead and increase the size. I'm not going to go huge just yet. but I also will go into the system settings, and this is where distributed or networked rendering can be advantageous. It's not as good as it used to be because the computers have to be logged in, and so the vacant computers aren't logged in, and if they log off, it can do bad results. But for the most part, if we're all here, we can share some computer resources. I'm going to turn distributed rendering on with that little check mark. Then I'm going to go to the hosts button right here, and I'm going to click Find Servers, which is going to go out and look, are there any available servers for me to use? And it looks like there's 24 that are unused. Yeah, go ahead and show me those. There they are. And I'll click the first 5 or so. And go ahead and click Resolve Servers and say OK. I do these in groups of 5 to try to make V-Ray not crash. If you do all 24 at once, it's about a 50-50 shot whether V-Ray crashes or not. So if you do them in groups of 5, generally you're OK, and you can come back. Notice that I save my VisOp just in case beforehand, and we can save Rhino and then bring it back. When that's done, I can go ahead and go back, and those 5 have been selected. I can come down and click the next 5 or 6. And I can say OK, and pretty soon I can get through the whole list. When you're done, click on Resolve Servers. It shouldn't have to do that, but OK, now that it's done, I'll go ahead and close this, and then it's time to beef up the rendering. I'll go ahead and start the render again. And we should see the kick in. Now, when this initially starts, I have just my computer, the 8 threads from my computer. Hopefully, as it continues to process, I'll pick up more threads from other computers along the way. It doesn't always work, but most of the time it will. It does take some time for all your content to go out to the host machines and then send it back to you. So you might not see them right away. It may take a little bit of time before it populates. And if you watch this progress window, you can generally see it's trying to send out those, and it'll probably say, yep, there it's connected to some of the hosts there. And it's trying to populate those. So it'll take a little while, but it should show up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel this for right now because I'm going to fix those little holes that I saw in my grass, and then I'll re-render it, and I'll bring you guys back and show you the end result. Okay, does that kind of make sense for where I'm going? I know you guys have a lot left to do still, so just start working. Remember, even if you don't get to a final render place today, show me something for today. Everybody's at a different place as we go forward from here. And when I have days where, like today, where I say, show me your final render or whatever, even if you don't get there, post something for this exercise. Don't not post it. Get yourself credit for it wherever you get. Okay? So I'm going to pause. I'll fix those corrections, and then I'll do a full render of it.